Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving straight into another explainer, and we are unpacking a really fascinating source text called The Blueprint of Creation, Analyzing the Design Argument. We're going to take a totally impartial, highly visual walk through the classic argument that the universe and biological life itself requires an intelligent originator. If you're a fan of seeing exactly how complex philosophical and scientific arguments are put together, you are absolutely in the right place. We're going to map out the entire architecture of this case, scaling all the way from the vast cosmos right down to microscopic cells. Now, just to be clear, we aren't taking sides today. We're simply here to examine the nuts and bolts of the argument itself. So let's take a quick look at our roadmap. We'll start with the design argument premise, move into functionality and fine-tuning, hit the Anthropic Principle, explore irreducible complexity in nature, and finally wrap up with biomimicry inspired by nature. Okay, jumping right into section 1, the design argument premise. To really ground this whole concept, the author starts with a highly practical, everyday analogy. Think about it for a second. When we look at a painting, we instinctively know it demands a painter, right? When we see a building, we know there was a builder. So the argument asserts that whenever we observe obvious function, clear intention, and highly ordered end results in nature, common sense practically screams that there has to be an originator behind it all. Now, what's really interesting is how the text takes that everyday observation and structures it into a formal three-part logical progression. Step 1 establishes the baseline rule. If design exists, it must have a designer. Step 2 makes a specific observation about our reality. The universe exhibits design. And then step 3 is the demanded conclusion, therefore the universe must have a designer. According to the source, this logical flow doesn't just hint at some vague creator. It points specifically to an omnipotent, rational prime mover, someone or something that has to exist completely outside the boundaries of the physical universe just to be able to create those initial laws of physics and motion in the first place. Moving right along to section 2, functionality and fine-tuning. To illustrate this idea of fundamental functionality, the author points us toward biological life. Specifically, let's look at the estimated 1 trillion cells that make up the human body. 1 trillion. That is an astronomical number. And every single one of those cells contains DNA. But here's the catch. This framework doesn't view DNA as just some random biological sludge. It frames it as a purposeful, highly coded instruction manual. It holds the exact information needed for growth, for healing, for reproduction. The text presents this deeply embedded information as foundational evidence of intent. And that brings us to the concept of fine-tuning. This is basically the argument that our universe operates on a razor's edge of incredibly precise balances. Let's take fundamental forces, like gravity or electromagnetism. The mathematical constants governing these forces are fixed at such exact values that if you were to tweak them even slightly, we're talking by microscopic fractions, the entire physical system of the universe would literally collapse into chaos. The text uses a really compelling what-if scenario to drive this point home, looking at the relationship between matter and antimatter. If the universe were just a product of pure, unguided randomness, statistically speaking, we'd expect an equal amount of matter and antimatter. But if that were the case, they would continuously crash into each other and destroy themselves in massive bursts of energy, which would obviously make life entirely impossible. The fact that our universe safely consists almost exclusively of matter is presented here as a massive, glaring indicator of deliberate fine-tuning. All right, let's pivot to section 3, the Anthropic Principle. So what is the Anthropic Principle? Basically, it asserts that Earth isn't just orderly, but that it's perfectly positioned to support human existence. We sit incredibly comfortably in what astronomers call the Goldilocks zone, an orbit that isn't too hot and isn't too cold. Unlike Venus, which is baking away far too close to the sun, or Mars, which lacks a sustainable atmosphere and liquid water, Earth's exact placement is viewed by the author as intentionally, carefully supportive of biological life. And this principle really hinges on some staggering, highly specific measurements. For example, 1,400 watts. Earth receives exactly 1,400 watts of solar energy per square meter. Why does that matter? Well, that exact solar constant is the absolute perfect amount of energy required to maintain liquid water across the surface of our planet and to sustain the very atmosphere we breathe. If we got just a little more or a little less, that delicate balance simply shatters. On top of that, Earth is wrapped in this highly designed cocoon of protection against incredibly hazardous space radiation. We've got the ozone layer, which aggressively filters out all that harmful UV radiation. And working right alongside it is Earth's magnetic field. This invisible force field literally deflects charged solar particles that are traveling at a staggering 1 to 2 million miles per hour. The source argues that this multi-layered protection isn't some happy cosmic accident, but a necessary, planned provision for life to exist at all. Which leads us to Section 4, Irreducible Complexity in Nature. This term was actually coined by biochemist Michael Behe. Irreducible complexity describes a single system of interacting parts where if you remove just one part, the entire system ceases to function. Think of it kind of like a car engine. If you pull out just a single crucial gear, the whole machine is dead in the water. The author uses this concept to argue that certain biological and physical systems couldn't possibly have evolved gradually, piece by piece over millions of years. Instead, they had to come into existence simultaneously, fully formed and ready to go. To illustrate this on a massive cosmic scale, let's consider the relationship between physical laws and mass. The law of gravity is completely meaningless if physical mass doesn't exist to actually express it, right? But on the flip side, physical mass is completely chaotic without governing physical laws to keep it in order. According to the argument, one absolutely cannot precede the other. Law and matter have to coexist simultaneously to function, which represents an irreducibly complex system right at the very foundation of physics. Zooming back in on biology, the argument highlights something called the bacterial flagellum. This is a tiny, tail-like appendage that bacteria use to move around. According to researchers at the Yale School of Medicine, this biological structure consists of a motor, a hook, and a filament, and it spins at incredibly high rates to propel the bacteria forward. The text directly compares this microscopic machine to an outboard motor on a boat, asserting that such incredibly specific micromachinery points squarely and undeniably at an intelligent designer. Finally, we arrive at Section 5, Biomimicry, inspired by nature. So, biomimicry is the practice of imitating natural biological designs or processes to solve really complex human engineering challenges. And this isn't just a fringe idea. Research centers at elite institutions like Harvard and MIT study this heavily. Engineers at these top organizations readily admit that nature's solutions are often way smarter, far more efficient, and much more adaptable compared to our own original designs. The story of Velcro is actually a brilliant illustration of this concept in everyday life. Back in the 1940s, a Swiss electrical engineer was out for a pretty mundane walk in the woods. He got incredibly frustrated because he had to keep pulling these stubborn, natural plant burrs off the fur of his hunting dog. But instead of just throwing them in the trash, he decided to put them under a microscope. He noticed this brilliant hook and loop structure and thought, hey, I can just copy that. That simple act of recognizing and mimicking biological design led to a revolutionary product that's now used all over the globe. For a more technical example, let's talk about Japan's famous bullet trains. Early models actually had a massive flaw. They created these huge disruptive sonic booms whenever they exited tunnels. To fix this massive noise pollution problem, engineers actually looked to the kingfisher bird, which dives seamlessly into the water without making a splash. By redesigning the nose of the train to precisely mimic the shape of the kingfisher's beak, the engineers achieved something absolutely incredible. Not only did they completely eliminate those loud pressure booms, but the trains ended up traveling 10% faster, all while using 15% less energy. Looking straight to the natural world's blueprint yielded vastly superior human engineering. So, we're going to leave you with a question to mull over today. When you look at the incredibly complex systems all around us, from the stars in the night sky to the birds flying above us, what do you see? Whether you view all these intricacies as unguided natural processes or as a highly intentional blueprint, examining the architecture of our universe is undeniably fascinating. Thanks for joining us for this explainer. Keep learning and always keep asking great questions.